Alright, so another 2 weeks and another DesignDoc React. So today we'll be reacting to Sonic and the gameplay variety, how focused gameplay improves a game. I don't exactly know what he's going to talk today. I mean, he seems to be specifically focused on the Sonic games, and I guess on how the Sonic games manage to have many different paths in their levels, very complex levels, even though the idea is still the basic idea of going from, left to right, or I guess in your screen, in that way, yeah. Anyways, so let's go and see what he exactly talks about.
Video games can serve as an escape from the ordinary, the monotonous, the common everyday events that make life dull.
Now that I see the captions by default here, I guess let me know if you prefer the caption. I mean, I am going to remove them today, because I am also kind of, hiding part of it. But if you do want them in the future, then let me know. I'll make sure that they are visible.
New and different experiences let us escape, explore, and have fun. But while putting variety into your game is important, game designers need to be careful. Creating a range of experiences shouldn't turn the game as a whole into an underdeveloped, forgettable mess. There is a fine line between variety and aimlessness. Having each distinct experience...
I guess what he's just saying is, if you make your game too broad, then you're not gonna... that game is just not gonna feel very polished, and it's not gonna have a focused experience, which is difficult to design as well.
Reflect a cohesive whole is the goal. Do it right and you get WarioWare, Grand Theft Auto, or The Witcher 3. Do it wrong and you get Carnival games for the Wii. But no series underscores just how tricky it is to add gameplay variety quite as much as Sonic the Hedgehog.
And like going back to like this idea of like getting like a broad game, I don't necessarily think it's impossible to do. It's just the type of game that would require ages of development, and it would just mean that you just have to think of the game it would just take ages, and you would have to make sure that whatever the path the player chooses to go through, it is fun and entertaining. And that is a difficult part, because if you make it like, I don't know, like a world simulation, like a whole world simulation where you can do whatever you want, then you have to make sure that if the guy decides to be a cop, that part of the game is fun. That if the guy decides to be, a shopkeeper, that thing is fun as well. And that is what's difficult in making a broad game like this. Although I don't think it's impossible, it just means that it would take ages to do, basically.
For over 2.5 decades, developer Sonic Team has tried over and over to add gameplay variety through different gameplay styles, with, well, mixed results. What is generally considered the core of a Sonic game? Going fast and momentum-based platforming. To let the player go fast, level designers need to make very large levels which are also challenging and interesting for the player to blaze their way through. For developers, this can be a design nightmare, as it requires a huge amount of development resources for a relatively short amount of gameplay in a single stage. Because of how expensive it can be to make this kind of level, a full Sonic-focused game is by design pretty short. This is partly why many Sonic games feature multiple playable characters that go through the same or at least similar stages with different styles of gameplay as a means to lengthen the game and add variety.
And also, like, newer Sonic games tend to have very limited paths. When you look at like the old Sonic games, a level itself has so many paths you can go through. You have like the main path, probably the fastest path. You just go to the right, and you'll find your way to the end, right? But otherwise, you also have like multiple paths throughout the whole thing, and that lengthens the game in the sense that you can explore the world if you want to, or just end the game as fast as possible. And a problem with, I think, 3D is partially because of this, is how long it would take to do more paths. They tend to be single paths, or like very few paths that kind of just connect to the same things. And I think that's one of the reasons newer Sonic have had trouble getting as much traction as the old ones.
The earliest and perhaps smartest use of multiple characters in the Sonic series can be found in Sonic 3 and its companion game, Sonic & Knuckles. Sonic 3 and Knuckles presents the player with 3 different characters. Sonic, who provides the standard fast platforming that fans expect, Tails, who adds the ability to fly and swim to bypass some of the platforming challenges, and Knuckles, who trades some speed and jumping for the ability to glide and climb walls. What's great about the characters in Sonic 3 is that they let the player approach the same levels in new ways while still staying true to the core of a Sonic game. Tails and Knuckles don't play drastically different from Sonic, they work under the same general rules and have the same goals, the end of a stage. They just have a few advantages that provide for a slightly different experience, adding in replay value and variety while still keeping the speed and momentum that makes a Sonic game feel like a Sonic game.
The difficult part, this is a great idea and this is a great thing. The difficult part about this is that you have to make the characters different enough so that they feel like different characters and feel like you can explore the world, in different ways. But at the same time, you don't have to make them too different, because otherwise you have to then design the levels so that they're fun independently of which character you're playing, which can be tricky. If suddenly, you give the fly ability to some other characters, then some levels might be completely pointless because you can just fly through other places. So you have to make sure that even whatever character you're playing, everything works fine. So if you have only one character, it's very easy to design it. Well, it's not easy, but it's easier to design a level that works well with that character. But if you add more characters with different abilities, suddenly you have to make sure that it works for all of them, and it takes more time. So, which is why you have to kind of have a balance between. It's always the same thing. It's always a balance. It's not as much of a balance in I think it's more a balance in time and resources. The same, right? In the sense that if the more different you make those characters, the more you'll have to spend time designing properly the big level, and the closer together, the more close these characters are, the less point it is to actually have different characters. So you have to really balance those things.
The Sonic Advanced and Sonic Rush series both use the same idea with different characters, and for the most part it works. While multiple characters were a solid way to bring variety and replayability for 2D Sonic games, how does this work in Sonic's jump to 3D? The original Sonic Adventure, released in 1999 for the Sega Dreamcast, featured 6 different playable characters, each with their own story and unique style of gameplay. These characters included Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, Amy, E102 Gamma, and Big the Cat. Sonic's gameplay consists of the fast platforming that players expect. Tails is similar, except that he has to race either Sonic or Eggman and retains his ability to fly. Knuckles changes the game up entirely with a treasure hunt for emerald shards in large open sandbox stages. Amy's story focuses on slower platforming while running from a giant robot. E102 Gamma is based around shooting, and Big the Cat's gameplay is all about putting a fishhook through his best friend's face.
But I've got to argue, I've got to, I guess, have a little disclaimer with this. I'm not like a big fan of Sonic games, and I have not played that many Sonic games. I mean, I've played the early ones, and then I had on the GameCube, me and my brother, we had the Sonic. How is that called? Shadow? I don't remember how the name of the game, but yeah. And honestly, it wasn't necessarily a bad game. But my point is, I'm not necessarily like a big fan, and I know like the fan base of Sonic is very big and very powerful, I say. But yeah, I just wanted to get that as a disclaimer. And from what I've heard is that, yeah, most fans actually agree that later games and the path to 3D was not necessarily very successful in the 3D games, in the Sonic franchise. Although a lot of people have been looking forward to the new game, Sonic Frontier, which we'll see how it does that.
As the years went on, the most divisive aspect of Sonic Adventure was these different characters and playstyles. Developer Yuji Naka was wrestling with creating such huge worlds for Sonic. In a 1998 interview, he said, "Because Sonic's very fast, you have to create a huge scale simulation.
Yeah.
I put huge efforts into creating a big map. Of course I have to focus on the details of the 3D world, but I have to create a vast scale map as well. This is the most difficult aspect of Sonic Adventure. If it were Mario or a slower character, I wouldn't have to create the huge world first for Sonic. But then thought, why not utilize these maps for other characters? Maybe I could add some variety to the game, not just running quickly through this huge world. That's one of the key concepts in the game." Now, using multiple characters in the same levels allows the developers to reuse art and design assets, which extends the game's length and adds in variety, but if it's not done carefully, it can dilute the focus of the core game. You can't expect the same level design to feel good for fast-paced platforming, extremely slow platforming, a treasure hunt, and a shooting gallery. Adding in a completely irrelevant fishing minigame with Bootleg Totoro doesn't solve the problem. Forcing the player to slog through every one of these playstyles to finish the game doesn't help either.
I mean, arguably, I believe that the playstyle and the main game design of Sonic also translate pretty hardly, I would say, to 3D. Simply because it is fast-paced platforming, which in 3D becomes a nightmare as soon as you add like a moving camera. That can become like very quickly like a nightmare. And that is actually something that you can very quickly tell that is the case, simply because even in the 3D games, a lot of the sections of the game, of the platforming, becomes 2D in some fashion. It's either like from the back going in a straight line, or the camera actually switches to the side, where you then start, having a normal-ish 2D platforming experience. So it is arguably hard, I would say, to do a proper 3D Sonic game.
This was a problem that Sonic 3 and Knuckles avoided because the characters were treated more like variations rather than completely different kinds of games. The stage design still felt intended for them.
I think this is a little bit what I talked about. He was mentioning that in the 3D, in the previous game, like the character were too far apart, so they were completely different experiences. While in here, they basically kept the same main mechanics with a few little changes, which made it feel still like a Sonic game.
At times, the levels in Sonic Adventure can feel at odds with certain characters that the stages weren't originally intended for. Taking a level that works well for Sonic and forcing it to also accommodate for the shooting or treasure hunting stages can limit the design space for both gameplay styles. For example, the downtown section of Speed Highway is an area that feels designed for Knuckles, with a lot of verticality on top of having an open world sandbox design, similar to that of Mario 64, with a ton of little nooks and crannies to explore while hunting for emerald pieces. Now, Sonic goes through the exact same area at the end of his version of Speed Highway, but because of the verticality and open nature of the stage, it feels like a strange and abrupt place to end a level as Sonic, who's at his best when he's running through long stretches of terrain.
You can already see here as well, the camera is going all over the place, and it's difficult to see what direction you are. And in a level like this, which seems to be more, more rectangular, and this is that you have stuff all over the place and not in a kind of straight line, it doesn't really work well to be going very, very fast.
Same problem applies to E102 Gamma, where 80% of his stages are shared with Sonic. Because Gamma's moveset doesn't really work with the roller coaster level design of Sonic, the developers gave him the smaller, flatter sections of those stages instead of building his own from scratch, which doesn't really work. Gamma's gameplay is based around shooting enemies to keep a timer from hitting 0, but the thing is, his stages are too small for this to even work. They're based around a timer, but really you don't need to shoot any enemies to make it in time, which makes his gameplay feel kinda pointless. Only Gamma's final stage takes any real advantage of his gameplay style, and it's the only one that wasn't originally built for Sonic.
And again, this is pretty much the same thing. If they had more time, they would have probably designed the levels better to fit all of the characters. It's just simply a matter of time and resources. Like it is most of the time.
This issue was partially fixed in Sonic Adventure 2, where the 6 playstyles are reduced to only 3 in the main game: running, shooting, and treasure hunting. Stages are no longer shared between characters beyond some similar themes and art assets, so levels are designed with the respective playstyles in mind. However, Sonic Adventure 2 still suffers from some serious pacing issues, amongst other problems. Emerald Radar. Sega continued to experiment with the series by using other characters and playstyles in Sonic Heroes, Sonic Unleashed, and the hilariously awful Sonic 06, all of which suffered similar problems. The additional characters and styles would become one of the focal points of criticism for Sonic from both fans and critics alike, so much so that the actual lack of them became a focal point for the marketing of Sonic 4. There was a general consensus that many people wanted more focus and polish put into Sonic's core gameplay, and aside from some of the handheld titles, it wouldn't be until 2010's Sonic Colors where Sega finally struck a balance between Sonic's high-speed gameplay, varied platforming, and exploration.
But they came back to a single character. They came back to only playing as Sonic. Although I wanted to mention that in the games where you play as the 3 characters at the same time and you can do switch, I think although they were not regarded as necessarily very good games, I think the main idea itself is very nice. Having like a 3D platformer where depending on the situation, you change characters to be able to, go over different obstacles. I think that is quite a nice design choice. And you can make it work so that, you have special abilities that work together as well that allows you to pass through different obstacles. And in essence, for me, I think that is a quite nice design. Now, for some reason, it didn't actually work out, but I guess I
Sonic Colors understands the core appeal of Sonic. It's not this, or whatever the hell this is. Sonic Colors keeps itself focused on this. Taking what was learned from the daytime half of Sonic,
which you can see here, again, it comes back to a single character, and you can see a lot of the parts are going to be seen in a 2D perspective, and if it is a 3D game.
Sonic Colors is about racing your way through the stage as Sonic and only Sonic. The game seamlessly shifts perspectives between 2D and 3D, and every level keeps the player on their toes by making them use Sonic's array of mobility-based moves with boosting, quick-stepping, drifting, homing attacking, and sliding. In addition to Sonic's large moveset, additional variety is created with the Wisps. Wisps are colorful creatures that serve as power-ups, granting Sonic special context-sensitive abilities that are built around the level design. There are a total of 8 Wisp powers, and they all share a common trait: movement. White fills up the player's boost gauge, Cyan turns Sonic into a laser that bounces off of walls, Yellow lets him drill underground and underwater, Green allows him to fly and dash through trails of rings to gain speed, Pink grants the ability to scale walls, Orange launches him up to great heights, Purple turns Sonic into a monster that chomps its way through enemies and obstacles, and lastly Blue lets him change special blue rings into platforms, and vice versa.
The good thing about this design, instead of having different characters that you play throughout as well, is that you can, design when you get these powers. So then you specifically give the player the powers when you're going to actually use them in the level, which is going to feel good because you'll have specific something to do, and it's just going to work the way that it's intended for. And it is a lot easier than to have like a whole level design for a completely different character.
Every Wisp power allows...
But you can see what I mean here, which is even though the game is somewhat 3D, it is always in a 2D perspective.
Allows Sonic to move in ways that he simply couldn't before. They're rarely ever required to complete the game, and most importantly, they are easy to control and quick to use on the fly, with just a press of the button or a flick of the Wii remote. These powers add in a slight Metroidvania style of exploration to the game, as they open the way to alternative routes and levels. For example, in the first stage, there are large sections of dirt designed for the Yellow Wisp, which is unavailable during the first play.
And you can see the camera position as well. He talked about camera position in previous video. But this one is the same thing. You can see the camera is very much focusing on that big patch of dirt. Which seems like a weird thing, but obviously it is pushing you to use that ability.
Playthrough. When the power is unlocked later on, the player can go back and explore these areas to see what they missed. These alternate routes often lead to one of the many hidden red rings, which unlocks bonus stages and eventually the ability to become supersonic. This gating and backtracking is nothing groundbreaking, but it's nice and adds some healthy replayability, variety, and depth to many of the stages. Sonic Colors sets up a solid foundation, and its follow-up Sonic Generations builds upon it with its healthy split of 2D Classic Sonic and 3D Modern Sonic. As a franchise, Sonic seemed like it was finally headed in the right direction. At least until it took another misstep, because Sonic Lost World takes the foundation that Sonic Colors and Sonic Generations had lovingly laid out, and completely trips over itself. Sonic Lost World goes too far with its variety. It loses coherency by rapidly switching between gameplay.
It looks extremely inspired by Mario Galaxy
styles throughout every stage. Every level feels like it operates under its own rules. The 2D and 3D levels feel like they use different physics, and they never transition smoothly into each other. Here, it's a cylinder that kind of plays like Sonic Colors and Sonic Generations. Now it's a 2D stage based around verticality. Now it's an auto runner. Now it's a rail-based level straight out Donkey Kong Country. Now it's a Super Monkey Ball level where the player rolls around a snowball. Now it's based around stealth. Now it's ice skate. Now it's rolling around giant pieces of fruit. Now it's pinball. And on top of all of this,
at the beginning I was thinking in my head, like, this is actually not that bad. Having a lot of types of levels can make it quite varied and fun. I guess unless you're looking for a very specific Sonic experience, it's true that you can be not what you expected. But I think it is quite nice to have this kind of variety. Again, it is mostly a problem of resources most of the time. But yeah, I mean, going all the way to pinball might be a little too far.
Wisps are also shoved in. Every power makes use of the Wii U's gamepad features, but they're unintuitive to use and end up completely breaking the game's flow. Even the powers that do return from Sonic Colors seem to function completely differently. And since only one type of power appears in each stage, the Metroidvania aspect from Sonic Colors no longer applies. The Wisps are treated more like level gimmicks that distract the player from the game's core. Even the game's final level, a stage that should test the player's skill with the game's core mechanics, instead introduces the Green Wisp power-up out of absolutely nowhere. This power-up allows the player to bypass what should be the game's final test, because the game never spent enough time letting the player build up their skills with the core gameplay. Now, we spent a lot of time talking about core gameplay.
So you mean that the developer made a hard level and then just like, this game level is too hard, so you just have the ability to skip it? That does seem a little bit weird.
Gameplay in other games in the series, but it's honestly unclear as to what the core of Sonic Lost World's gameplay really is. When the game begins, it seems like it's the cylindrical level design, but less than half of the main levels even use it, and even the levels that do quickly shift into the other styles. Simply, it's an unfocused mess. Sonic Lost World and Sonic Colors are opposites of each other.
So in that case, it seems like the game developers went into like a very broad idea of how they wanted to do it, and they didn't really then focus on a single thing, which tends to be the thing is the players. For the players, it's easier to think this game plays this way, or this game is like this. This is the type of game that this game is. And if you then just shove a lot of different stuff into it without having a specific focus, then you're gonna lose some of them. And I mean, there's some games that do similar things. Like for example, if you go to WarioWare, obviously it's a whole minigame, or even WarioWare I think is a good example. But you do have like a goal, and the whole point of the game is having all of these minigames. So they could have, I guess, kind of focused it like that, but I guess it doesn't necessarily work that well with a level-based game.
Sonic Colors is a game that adds variety that meshes with its core to create a cohesive whole, whereas Sonic Lost World uses variety to do pretty much the opposite, where the alternative playstyles are like separate satellites floating around the core.
Yeah.
In moderation, unrelated gameplay styles can be fun, but when it's taken to its extreme, it can fall apart, making the game unfocused and underdeveloped. Of course, Sonic games are not the only ones that have struggled trying to juggle different gameplay styles. I would recommend taking a look at some...
But I wouldn't necessarily put Spore in there. I think Spore is like a gem of game design. I don't know. It's maybe one of the most interesting games ever, period. I mean, it's incredible how it just worked out. Even though, yeah, there's a ton of different gameplay style. But there's not that many, because there's like a progression. Again, the core of the game is a progression in civilization of a creature, which I guess kind of puts everything together.
Other series and think about how they incorporate variety. Take a look at games like Sly Cooper, Grand Theft Auto, WarioWare, Metal Gear Solid 5, Nier, and Jak and Daxter. Look at these games and ask yourself this. Do the different gameplay styles blend together to make the experience stronger, or do they simply dilute the experience?
I mean, I mentioned WarioWare before, but what I really like about WarioWare is that when you decide to make a WarioWare, it is just simple. Just make minigames. Make minigames that you can finish in 30 seconds to a minute max, and it can be literally anything, and it's just gonna work, because the core idea of the game is having this wacky random shit to do, and it is completely unrelated to, it doesn't have to be whatever related to the game, the actual progression of the rest of the game, which is simply, are you going to beat this minigame, and then are you going to beat the next minigame after that, right? That's the whole thing about WarioWare, and it just works, and it's I feel like it's one of those things that has to be very, very fun to develop, simply because you probably just split everything into every developer and just like, oh, just do whatever, just do a mini game, you know. Sorry. So yeah, I think it is a very weird specific game though. So anyways, I guess that was it. So I guess, yeah, so I couldn't say that much because I haven't again played that many Sonics, and this was very specific to Sonics. But I guess the big things about this video is that you have to juggle. Variety is good, but too much variety and variety without proper development is not gonna work, basically, in the sense that if you are gonna add, for each extra variety that you're adding to the game a lot of development time. So if you do not have that development time, you do not have those resources, it is better to make a more specific and very linear thing than having it have many different variety, different mechanics and different things that cannot be developed to their whole potential. When you look, for example, from one of the games where it had like 6 different characters, obviously the difficulty with that is that you would have to design each level work, to make them work for all of the characters, or you can make specific levels for each character, which all of that is a lot of development on. And then you can see the big change, which is that in the next game they pretty much did the same, but they just removed 3 characters. So suddenly instead of having 6 characters, you have 3, which means that you can focus the design of all the levels a little bit more than what when you had 6. As simple as that. So if you have the same amount of time to develop each game, it's obviously going to work better, and you're going to have more time to design each level if you have 3 than if you have 6. It's just simple. And in the last game that they showed, is kind of a similar thing. Is that they went for like very varied gameplay, and it feels like the game doesn't have a purpose anymore because nothing is really focused around a specific gameplay or a specific idea. And then he goes and mentions like WarioWare, he mentions GTA and other games. But like the thing about what really brings GTA together is that it feels like a living world-ish. I guess we could talk about the design of those games a lot more. And you have the story that brings everything together. And then obviously the example of WarioWare is a bit different because basically it is a very weird type of game, which is very, I guess the mini games are completely really disconnected from the actual progression of the game. It's kind of like a separate thing, and they do that. Also, they show it. You have usually they kind of pan into the mini game and pan out of the mini game, kind of showing that you're going out of that thing, which is a very specific experience in itself, right? So yeah, I think the big thing that we have to take from this video is that it's all about how much time you have to develop, how many resources you have to spend. And if you can add variety, do it, because it's probably going to be nice. And it's always nice also if you have like a very specific game. Having a change of pace by having a different type of gameplay is always very refreshing and very nice. But you have to make sure that it works. And you have to make sure that whenever you do that, it just adds an actual thing to the game. If it doesn't, and the way that you do that is by spending enough time on it. Simply as that. And yeah, which is why I said a game that actually has everything in it. It's not impossible, I don't think. I think it is just gonna take ages. It's gonna take, ages, like centuries, basically. So that's basically it. I think you just have to make sure that you juggle the amount of time and development that you have and available to you. That's just basically it. So yeah, that was it. That was Sonic and gameplay variety, how focused gameplay improves the game. Very specific, very focused on Sonic, which again I said I haven't actually played that many Sonic games myself, but an interesting video nonetheless. So anyways, that was it. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.